The recent NHL games from EA have always been interesting to me. Compared to Madden and FIFA, the NHL franchise almost feels like it gets neglected by EA, while at the same time it can feel like the opposite as well. The game has yet to jump to the Frostbite engine, isn't available on PC, isn't getting a proper next-gen version this year, and just seems like it's at the end of EA's priority list. That said, the NHL games offer a lot of cool franchise mode and customization features that other EA Sports titles are missing, such as coaching trees in franchise mode, the ability to create a team, and a more realistic and authentic presentation broadcast. Despite these features, however, the core gameplay, especially at more competitive levels, is deeply flawed. For newcomers to the series, the gameplay of NHL 21 appears fine on the surface, but the more you play, the more you realize how broken it really is. Online games can be ruined by toxic players exploiting the AI and cheesing to win. It almost stops feeling like a game of hockey entirely. Board play is bad, the shot blocking system is broken, AI feels identical to previous years, goal horns are inaccurate, player likenesses and graphics are just way behind where they should be in 2020. Critics and fans alike have been hard on NHL games in recent years, and with NHL 21, reviews are pretty low. And while the game does offer some improvements, such as a revamped Be a Pro mode, it's been a long time since we've had a truly great NHL video game. Like most sports games, the current console generation has seen NHL games stagnate and regress in many areas. I think most people can agree that the last great NHL game was NHL 14, EA's last NHL game made exclusively for the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation. The next-gen jump resulted in what many consider to be a step backwards with NHL 15, and while there have been improvements to these newer games in some areas, none have been considered great like NHL 14 was. 14 was innovative, bringing a ton of new features and gameplay additions to the series. Gameplay is probably the #1 reason NHL fans have a soft spot for 14. NHL 13 brought a new physics-based skating engine into the fold, and 14 refined that engine and delivered what many would call the best and most fluid gameplay ever in a hockey game. With the new engine in 13, defending required players to have discipline and position themselves between the forward and the net in order to limit scoring opportunities. In 14, this remained the case, but the refined player movement gives slightly more room for error as players can turn quicker and sharper with faster lateral skating. This level of control helps slow the game down, but in a good way. There was less panic as users had complete control over their players. NHL 14 also introduced collision physics, allowing players to deliver massive open ice body checks. While it's a bit more on the arcade side with big hits happening all the time, it made for a gameplay experience that was way more fun. It also helped balance the game, as in 13, shorthanded goals were a bit too common, but 14's collision engine helped cut those down a lot. Fighting was also revamped as well, utilizing EA's Fight Night Enforcer engine for third-person planned fights, and also for the heat-of-the-moment brawls, which involve punching opponents with the right analog stick and pulling their jersey with the left stick. NHL 14 features the best fights in a hockey game in a long time, with smart AI that isn't scared to start fights, along with enjoyable combat. The offensive side of gameplay was nearly identical to NHL 13, which is a good thing, as 13 had fantastic gameplay in its own right. 14 did add a one-touch deke option, where you can tap the left bumper and your player will automatically perform a trick. While more advanced players would likely use the manual deke system, it was a good feature for newcomers to hockey games, as they could hit one button and potentially get out of trouble when they're about to get body checked. Beyond gameplay, 14 had some of the best depth the series had ever seen. The single-player career mode Be a Pro was rebranded as Live the Life. Now you can control your player on and off the ice. Throughout your career, you are asked questions by the media about training day incidents, game performances, and more. Your answers affect your position with management, teammates, fans, and your ability to play on game day. For example, you can choose to go partying at night, which can improve your chemistry with teammates, but the lack of good sleep would result in lowered stats. This type of immersion in a career mode was very advanced for the time. Compare that to Madden 25's career mode at the time, for example, and NHL was miles ahead. NHL 14 also introduced a classic NHL 94 legacy mode. NHL 21 actually has a similar mode available for those who pre-ordered the game, which is cool in theory but would have been nicer if it was available for everyone who bought 21. In NHL 14, the anniversary mode turns off many more advanced rules of the game and turns up the speed of the game, resulting in a faster paced and easier to pick up and play version of hockey, full of one-timers and slap shots from the blue line. The camera is shifted to a top-down perspective and the gameplay feels very similar to NHL 94, only with updated graphics. Features like this go a long way towards adding replay value to a sports game, as more ways to play result in more things to do in the game. While the presentation of the mode could have been better, I think most people remember it fondly. Hockey Ultimate Team was in its early stages, and while the NHL games aren't as money hungry as FIFA or Madden, for example, it's still clearly a main focus for EA today due to the mode's profitability. However, I think many people miss the older days of HUT, when the grind was less intense and the gameplay was much more fair and balanced. NHL 14 had an incredibly dense online offering besides HUT, with GM connected and a ton of online leagues, tournaments, shootouts, quick matches, and more. This was a sports game so feature-rich for online and offline players that it actually felt worth your $60. NHL 14 was a massive step forward from 13, bringing hockey fans the definitive game for the 20th anniversary of EA's NHL franchise. While many people may prefer NHL 94 or NHL 04, or even some of the NHL 2K games, I think pretty much everyone can agree that 14 was the last great NHL video game. The gameplay and overall polish are lacking in more recent NHL games, and there really hasn't been a great hockey game since NHL 14. NHL 15 removed a ton of great features, such as online team play, EA Sports Hockey League, and a season mode. Be a Pro was stripped down, removing the grind to get to the pros and instead dropping you right onto an NHL team. There was no more challenge or depth to the mode, which NHL 14 had in spades. NHL 15 reminds me of Madden 13 in the sense that it made some gameplay improvements, but stripped away a ton of the features that made the series so fun in the first place. 15 did add new presentation, but after that, gameplay only got worse, and depth is still missing in many areas in newer games. While the NHL series has fallen off over the past few years, at least NHL 14 is still a modern looking game that holds up very well today. The skating and shooting physics are fantastic, and the actual hockey gameplay is a beautiful representation of the sport. If you're new to hockey games, 14 is a great game to pick up and play. It still has a strong community creating rosters for the game. In fact, someone recently created a 1967 to 68 historic roster set. While NHL games today are underwhelming, NHL 14 was a game that nearly everyone loved then and today. While it wasn't exactly the greatest sports game ever made, in what has become a predictable pattern among many sports franchises, the lack of innovation in more modern titles has left 14 with a better reputation than it had at launch. Had NHL 15 not been such a disaster, improvements to 14's base could have given us fantastic hockey games for years to come. And while that didn't happen, at least we got 14, and at least the last great NHL game is a more recent one. 2013 was probably EA's last good year for creating sports games overall, and with the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 arriving, hopefully they can get back to that level of quality and innovation. And if not, maybe someone else will. Thanks for watching.